There we go. All right, welcome everyone. I can see a couple of faces, not others. I'm assuming everybody's having some lunch and doing some stretching, maybe some post-yoga stretching, hopefully. Welcome to the Environment Week Symposium put on by Environment Lethbridge and Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association. This is the beginning of our afternoon session. I hope some of you got to enjoy the yoga class, the yoga at home. Or yoga in the yard, I suppose. And we're going to start this afternoon with a speaker, which is Jennifer Tarnowsky. Jennifer is a long-standing original founder of the Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association, and she's also kind of our main coordinator for the Lethbridge Fruit Rescue. And she's got a huge has had a huge role in the community with a couple of the other community gardens that are going on as well. And Jen coordinates our efforts for the Fruit Rescue Program. And so today she's going to talk about how to identify when our fruit is actually ripe and getting to know our trees and our shrubs just a little bit better to help us utilize that harvest in a better way. And hopefully she talks a bit about what the Fruit Rescue is and sort of how you can get involved as well. That's my unprompted prompt for you. For those of you who might not be familiar with the program. So I will turn it over to Jen, and I will probably keep everybody but Jen muted just for the sake of not having any background noise. This will be shared on the Environment Lethbridge website post today for those folks who couldn't join us. So if you do have something to say or you have questions, I'll have you type them over in the chat room, and then I'll interrupt Jen, or when there's a natural pause, we will ask the questions, and then there'll be a bit of time at the end for a question and answer as well. So take it away, Jen.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mandy. I'm going to apologize in advance if there's any background noise on my end. I've got a foster cat that is being a little active right now, so hopefully he's not too meowy and scratchy right next to me. But yeah, so as Mandy said, I'm a longstanding member of the Fruit Rescue Program. I joined in its really early stages. I didn't quite found it, but it was probably only about a year or two old when I started getting involved. And then I started getting more heavily involved and got some other individuals from my garden networks involved. And so now Pat Hod and myself have basically created what is now the Fruit Rescue Program. And it's still growing. It's still, you know, kind of ironing out some kinks, but we're generally speaking quite happy with how it's done over the last couple of years. It's grown exponentially. And so we're really pleased with, you know, the future of what will be the Fruit Rescue Program. So for those who don't know, yeah, we are a committee of the Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association. Our mission is just to make use of what would otherwise be wasted fruit in the city. There's thousands of fruit trees within the city limits, and so a lot of it tends just to go to waste. And so we do our best to connect volunteer pickers with the trees that are otherwise going to be underutilized. To get involved, if you aren't already, the best way is just to reach out via email. So it's lethbridgefruitrescue@gmail.com. This season, we're kind of changing up a little bit as everybody is adapting to the situation at hand. So we have a little bit more regulations over kind of becoming involved as a picker. So we will be rolling that out in the next couple of weeks, and we're looking forward to getting it started. We are often in parks. We won't be doing that so much this year, but a couple years ago, 2 years ago now, we bought a fruit press. So if you have been to any of the kind of common festivals, Apple Fest was a really popular one that we used to host, where we were there with the fruit press to press a lot of the kind of community apples. So we'll be doing something like that, but this year with the Interfaith Food Bank primarily. So we won't be quite as publicly accessible just with the situation. But otherwise, we're still gonna just kind of do what we usually do. So reach out to us if you want to get involved. We are always looking for volunteers. So hopefully I will recognize some names in the Gmail in the next couple of days. So with that, I think I'll just go ahead and jump in. So with the Fruit Rescue Program, we get we have this issue of we ask our fruit tree owners, can you let us know when your fruit's getting ripe? And they say, sure. How do I know that? And so that's what sort of sparked kind of my research into identifying. I don't know. How do you know that? How do you determine when your fruit's ripe? You just kind of know. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't actually know the variety of fruit that they have in there. You know, they can tell me it's an apple or it's a cherry, but beyond that, they don't know the name. They don't know what season that they can expect it to be ripe. They just kind of, you know, at some point the fruit just kind of falls off and they miss it. So so what I did last fall, I think, or was it spring, maybe last year, I wrote a blog for the Sustainable Living Association. And it reviews all of this information in detail. So if you're sitting there with a notepad, madly scribbling notes, don't worry about it. It's all written down already for you. So I'll get Mandy to post that link at the end of the session. You guys can peruse it when you have some time. So what I would like to know, before I get too involved in the discussion, what type of fruit trees are the people in the audience here kind of familiar with or want to know more information? Maybe what I'll do, Mandy, can people do little thumbs up reactions? Can we maybe find out? So if you have, say, a cherry tree, can you? Awesome. Okay, thanks, Hannah. How about a plum tree? Okay, nobody's got plums. What's another one? Pear?
I'm going to stop just for a second, Jen. Some people might not actually know how to grab the thumbs. At
Good
the
point.
bottom of your screen, there should be a tab marked reactions, and you can click on that and it'll bring up a thumbs up or kind of a clapping little thing. I'm not sure if it's the same for phones.
All right, so maybe I'll start again. So we'll do cherries. Okay, so Scott, and then Hannah was another one. Wonderful. So plums. How about pears? Okay, so crab apple. Okay, and then what about just regular apple? Oh, okay. So I will definitely talk about cherries then. And we will I'll still kind of peruse the other fruits, but I'll focus a little bit more on kind of the really popular ones. So definitely cherries. There are a lot of cherry trees in the city. Apple is obviously the most common, so I'll talk about that. But we do have plums. We've got different types of pears as well. I've heard rumors of like some hardy apricots, which I think is super cool. I think it's it's a very rare thing, but maybe one day I'll get to see it. That would be really cool. And there's also things like walnuts, obviously berry trees like raspberries, blueberries, different kind of bush type trees, or, you know, fruits, berries, all that kind of good stuff. Anyways, so there's lots out there. And so the really common one is apple. So when it comes to how to determine when your fruit is ripe, you want to look at what type of fruit it is, obviously, but there's two main kind of classifications of fruit. There's climacteric and non-climacteric. So the climacteric will produce and respond to ethylene gas. So very common, bananas, apples are very highly climacteric, and they produce a lot of ethylene gas, and they are often used to further the ripening of other such climacteric fruits. So pears, plums, stone fruits, even melons, those will all respond to ethylene gas. The non-climacteric are the berries, the cherries, and the grapes. I'm going to open up my chat for a second. Okay, so close that. Okay. Yeah, so the non-climacteric are the easiest to determine when they're ripe. The reason is because they don't respond to ethylene gas, they don't produce ethylene gas, they ripen on the tree. When they look nice and they taste nice, you pick them, they stop ripening. So the easiest way for those ones, so cherries, you're just gonna watch. What color are they? So most cherry trees are going to be a sour cherry in our city. The Evans cherries are the most earliest variety, so they usually ripen up in kind of early to mid-July. If you're picking cherries early in the season, they're almost guaranteed to be Evans. They're a bright red cherry and they're quite sour and tart. So those ones, they just become very bright red, and eventually they'll just turn kind of, you'll see them when they're getting overripe, they just get kind of just black spots. And that's them kind of just kind of going over the edge. So with other types of cherries, so there's another variety. So they're in the Romance series. So these ones are a little bit later than the Evans cherries, and they're a little bit sweeter. They have a much darker kind of burgundy almost of a red, and they're gorgeous. Those ones, they get darker and they get darker and they get darker, and eventually they'll turn black when they're overripe. So the best way with cherry trees, if you're just monitoring your tree, taste them when it starts kind of looking like a nice color, and Evans cherries are always going to be sour, but the Romance cherries will kind of start to get sweeter as they you know, kind of ripen up. Once they're picked though, they stop ripening. If you are picking them and you want them to store for a little bit longer, pick them with the stems on. So don't pull off the stem, just actually cut the stem from the tree. That will help them store a little bit longer. And they'll store well in the fridge for a couple of days, up to at least a week, if they're not washed especially. So when it comes to the other berries, same thing. Once they're picked, they're picked. Grapes are kind of an interesting one. So most non-climacteric, I hate that word. Most of those fruits are kind of an earlier season for ripening. Grapes are like very end of season. So they'll turn color. They'll look good, but you actually want to wait until after last frost to pick grapes. There's something special about the frost. It just sweetens them right up. There's certain apple varieties that are the same, and so I will talk about that. All right, so I'm going to just really quickly. Okay, so are there any questions about cherry trees that I can answer before I move on? I got lots of time, so. Okay. So when it comes to the climacteric, so again, these fruits produce ethylene gas. So what's wonderful about them is you can pick them when it's convenient for you, and then let them continue to ripen indoors. So for basically all of the climacteric fruits, you can just kind of monitor them. And when you're pretty confident that they look good for you, you can bring them inside and slowly work at them. So most, when it comes, I'll start with apples. So they're kind of frustrating because there are so many varieties of apples. If you're not familiar with your tree and you don't know what you're working with, it's really tough to know, you know, like, is it an early season, is it mid-season, or is it late season? Generally, early season are smaller, late season are larger. The early season are going to be your tartar kind of baking apples, they're firmer. The late season are the bigger ones, and again, the later the season, they tend to get into the frost, and so they tend to be quite a bit sweeter. When you're monitoring your apple trees, and again, if you're like completely unfamiliar what I definitely recommend is just take notes and just kind of check up on your tree. So look at things like, again, how big is the apple? Is it continuing to grow throughout August, or is it starting to change color by the time July comes around? That's going to be an indicator if it's early or if it's late. Once it's uniform in color, that's a good sign, right? Okay, it's probably, we're getting close. You can then do things, so there's a couple of tests. So the easiest way for all of these, so apples, pears, and for plums as well, is how easily does it come off the tree? So I call it the pick test. So with apples especially, you can kind of twist and pull up as you pick it, and if it comes off really easily, that's a really good sign it's ripe. If it hangs on and it doesn't quite want to give, it needs a little bit longer. Another thing you can do, so again, so you've got this kind of color changing fruit, you're not quite sure if it's ripe yet, you can take it off the tree, cut it open, and look at the seeds. If they're white, it's not quite ready. If they're dark, that's a good sign, right? It's definitely getting close. At this point, taste it as well, right? If it still tastes a little tart, maybe not quite where you'd like it, give it a little longer. So again, especially as we're getting into the later seasons, varieties, you want to wait for that frost. So a lot of people get really excited where it's like, I have this beautiful apple tree and it's full of apples and you need to come pick them right now because they're gonna fall and blah, 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 blah. And it's, like mid-September. And at this point, we're kind of like, well, let's wait a little bit, because if you taste them, like, they taste fine, but I know that they'll taste better if we give it a little bit longer. And again, the wonderful thing about these fruits is that you can just pick a couple. You're getting anxious, take some of the easy ones off, set them inside, let them continue ripening indoors, and then do another fall crop, right, when after that last frost, and get those really sweet ones. So again, just sort of, you can monitor that way and play around with your tree, take notes, figure out what works best. Another good indicator with apples is the firmness. Most of the time they're going to be firm. There are some softer varieties out there, but if the apples are easy to pick and or they're falling off, again, that's a really good sign that they're ripe. But if you can like crush the apple in your hand, it's overripe. It's too soft. So that's something to look for as well if you're not sure if it's overripe for your preference. If you really want to get scientific about it, there is also, it's called the iodine test. So what you can do is I've put a link in the blog I wrote. You can make a solution with some iodine, cut open an apple and spray it on the inside. The iodine will react with either the starch or the sugar. So if it's underripe, it'll react with the starch and it'll turn black. If it's like a good ripeness, there'll be sugar present and it won't react with the starch because there's less of it. So that's something else you can do when it comes to your apples. Yeah, is there any questions before I move on from those ones? Okay. So crab apples are the kind of exception to those, what I kind of said earlier. They're tricky because they're all small, and there are still those kind of early season, late season. So just a heads up there, crab apples, if they're a lighter color, they tend to be early season. Keep an eye on them. Same rules apply. I want to point out though, it's called the doglow crab apple. It's a really common crab apple, and it's about the size of my thumb, about maybe that long, and it's very oval, and it's got a very dark kind of pinky red to it. That one is a late season. You can pick it throughout the season, but if you wait until kind of August, that's when they're the sweetest and the best. So again, that's just sort of a heads up there. It's a common one, and definitely one of my favorites of the crabapple varieties. So plums are a really easy climactic fruit to know when it's ripe. they will change color, obviously. And what's nice about them is there's sort of two ways you can do it. If you want to store them a little longer, you want to pick them before they fall off the tree. So all you need to do is same thing. If they pick easily, that's a good sign. They're probably ready to go. But you want to have them still a little firm. So the color's changed. They're still firm, but they come off the tree easily. You're set. However, if you just let the Lethbridge wind do your work for you, they will all blow off the tree, but they're still like, you know, they're at their peak ripeness. They're gorgeous. They make really good dried fruit at this stage. When you just pick them up off the ground, obviously give them a wash and use them right away. They are ripe by this point. Pears, on the other hand, are the worst in trying to figure out when they're ripe. The reason is because pears are unusual in that they ripen from the inside out. So unlike apples, where you can cut open an apple and look at the seed and determine, okay, it's white, it's not ripe yet, pears you can't do that with. They will be hard and firm on the outside, but the inside will be mature. So if you wait until they feel soft, they're actually overripe on the inside. So I've written a bunch of information with regards to pears and how to tell. Ultimately, what you want to look for, a good test is if you press right where the stem and the pear, you know, kind of meet the fruit, the flesh of the pear and the stem, if you can kind of press that and it's a little soft, like it gives a little bit of a bounce back, but it's you can feel the indentation, that's good. You're looking really, really golden there. But with pears, it's really the pick test. If it comes off easily, bring them inside, set them in to finish ripening. You don't want to leave them to ripen on the tree because they will be overripe. Yeah, okay, so that's like the gist of it all. Thank you for sticking with me and listening to what I have to say. I don't know, do I have any questions or thoughts?
I've included the link to your blog a couple of times in the thread. So for those of you who joined us a little bit late, you can find the link for the blog there, and then the Fruit Rescue Gmail address and stuff in there as well. So you can capture what it is Jen's saying, because I'm assuming it's off of there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. One thing I can mention too, so I wrote this blog with the, like I said, with the sort of frame set of people don't know what trees they have. If you're lucky enough to actually know, what I would definitely recommend is looking up, it's called the Days from Bloom. So if you know the variety, there's actually a number out there when it comes to, all right, if it's bloomed on this, you know, like it'll be X many days from its bloom date to when you can expect your fruit to be ripe. So that's a, like, but most people don't have that luxury. So.
Maybe we could talk a little bit, or you could, not we, if you could just share a little bit about if people, because some people on the call might not have their own fruit trees, how they might go about, like in terms of the fruit rescue, how can we facilitate them getting some fruit?
Totally, yeah. Thank you for your comment, Leona, by the way. Yeah, so for a lot of people are in that boat where they don't actually have fruit trees themselves, but they want to, they want in on it, on the good stuff, because there are people who have multiple fruit trees in their yard and are pulling their hair out at the end of every season because it's such a mess. So yeah, ultimately, if you want to come through the fruit rescue program, sign up early, and just get involved with us. We're always looking for pickers. There are way too many trees for what we currently have. If you just want to say have a little bit of cherries for your freezer, just, you know, that's fine. A lot of people, they do only just sort of come they do 1 or 2 pickings and they're satisfied, and that's enough for them. But we do really value the individuals who will just like, they're totally content with a variety of all sorts of fruit at all sorts of times of year. So that's the type of volunteer we really love to see and appreciate, because people get really excited at the beginning of the season. We have this huge influx of like everybody wanting to pick apples, and so they get all of the early season, and by late season, when we have all these gorgeous and huge and beautiful and sweet, and we have no pickers. so yeah, join and just kind of, I guess, let us know what you're looking for, how willing you are to get involved, and we'll do our best to accommodate what we can. I think that answers that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Any other questions before we let Jen go?
I do have one question. I have an apricot tree in my yard. Is that similar to? I do. Is that similar to plums?
Yes, it would be a stone fruit. So it would be. It's funny. I don't know if you caught that, where I'm the like magical apricots that I've heard rumors, but I haven't actually ever seen one. So I will be coming to your house this summer.
Well, it needs a little bit of TLC. It's been kind of neglected for about 10 years, and so I've got to get it pruned really well, and it didn't bloom at all this year, so there probably won't be any fruit at all.
Okay.
But maybe next year.
Maybe next year. Okay, that's awesome. Well, I know a guy who does some good work on trees, so
Right.
yeah, and that's something I can mention too. I mean, for those who do have trees, like I do highly recommend getting your fruit tree pruned and regularly maintained. It helps with the overall structure and safety and production of fruit. So, but yes, apricots would be similar to plums. I've never actually had to pick one, so I don't know. That's really exciting though. I'm gonna come check that out.
Awesome. We'll just roll right into the zero waste then, if there's no more questions. Yeah, and just a reminder again that you can find everything Jen talked about on the link that I've posted here to the right.
It's probably a lot more concise than what I just did. But yeah, lots of information. And for, well, I guess it would all be recorded, but it is just lethbridgesustainableliving.org.
Yeah, I posted it in there too.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, thank you very much for listening to my spiel, and I hope to be picking fruit with some of you this summer.
Thanks, Jen.
Awesome. All right,
and our
bye,
next presenter's here. See you, Jen. Our next presenter has showed up. If you only knew what it took to get her here. Fantastic. Maybe what I'll do here, I'm assuming we're just rolling one into the other, being that we're using the same Zoom link. So I've noticed a few other folks joining us. Welcome, everybody. We're here for the Environment Week Sustainable Symposium put on by Environment Lethbridge and Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association. Thanks for joining us. Maybe I could just take the liberty of saying that if you enjoy this format and maybe you want to see a few more things going on in the future in this way, if you have any ideas of presenters and topics that you want to see for upcoming symposium style things like this, because I suspect this might be the way we do this for the next several months, if not the remainder of the year. If you have any ideas, feel free to contact Hannah at Environment Lethbridge or send me a message, and I'm sure we'll be collaborating again in the future. So if you know somebody or you are somebody who has some knowledge in this sustainable regenerative kind of theme to share, reach out to us, and we're happy to put something together so you can have an opportunity to share. That's perfect. Thanks. Who did that? Oh, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. All right, well, we'll just roll right into our next speaker here. We are going to delve into the zero waste journey with Loryne, and Loryne is a member of the Southern Alberta Zero Waste Group. She's also a board member for the Lethbridge Sustainable Living Association. And I know that she lives this life zero waste and sustainability. And so she's going to share with us kind of the basic steps and how you can delve in and jump in your own way into the zero waste world. So it'll be similar format to Jennifer's talk. We have 30 minutes and then just maybe leave a few minutes at the end for question and answer perhaps. And if you have any questions and Loryne's talking, if you want to type them into the chat room, I will, when there's a natural pause, kind of interrupt and ask her the question as well. So thanks for doing this, Loryne. I'm assuming you can unmute yourself.
I sure can.
All right, give her.
Alrighty. So I do have a little PowerPoint here. I wasn't sure if I wanted to present that or not. I don't know. Maybe I won't. It's a little easier that way. All right. So I will just get set up here. Alrighty. So how to start your zero waste journey. Today, the topics we're going to discuss are a waste-conscious mindset, strategies to minimize food waste, the impact of shopping local on your zero waste journey, and increasing self-sustainability. First, I'd like to just talk a little bit about my zero waste journey. So I started my zero waste journey about 3 years ago now. I was at a point in my life where it felt like I was at a fresh start, sort of a new beginning. I had just moved into a new house, and so it felt like a really good opportunity to start this zero waste journey. I hadn't moved with very many items, and so I had the opportunity to start fresh with all of the items I needed. And so while I was restocking my house and grocery shopping and purchasing items that I needed on a daily basis that I didn't have, I spent the time just researching items that would be sustainable, reusable, long-lasting, and high quality. And that was quite a journey. And looking back, it would have been much easier to do step by step. And so my recommendation based on that is to take this journey one step at a time. Starting with a waste-conscious mindset. So the way I describe a waste-conscious mindset is looking at items that perhaps you don't need anymore or that you'd like to replace with the mindset of, can I reuse this? Can I repurpose this? Can I repair this? Can I recirculate this? And if all else fails, can I recycle this? And moving from that space makes it easier to look at items as though they are regenerative instead of disposable. Looking at items as though they can be used by another person, that one man's trash is another man's treasure, sort of saying. And that's the mindset that I've found is the most productive in terms of the zero waste journey. The other thing is reduction. Reducing your consumption. What can you maybe use less of? Maybe use a reusable option instead of a disposable option. Maybe not use it all. I do want to just acknowledge that each and every one of us who embarks on this journey is going to blaze their own trail and follow their own path. This zero waste journey is definitely individualized, and you can make it your own in so many ways. It's important to recognize the areas that you feel passionate about and start there. Going zero waste can seem daunting, so take it one step at a time. A really great first step is to do a trash audit. Evaluate your waste. See what it is that you're throwing out. Maybe you do this in your home. Maybe you do this at work. Maybe you have a trash in your car. Maybe even your purse or your wallet. The way to do this is pick a designated amount of time that you're going to save your waste for. And then at the end of that designated amount of time, dump it out, see what's in there, do a little audit, see what you use, what you could reduce, reuse, recycle, recirculate, repair, or repurpose. And just a note on recycling, just be sure to follow the guidelines of recycling. Try to recycle properly. according to your area. If you have a blue bin, know what can go in the blue bin and what can't. And places like London Drugs will also accept recycling of light bulbs and batteries and small electronics. The University of Lethbridge accepts pens and markers and other writing utensils to recycle. And I've seen recently quite a few ads for large electronic recycling in the city as well. A really great example of this replacing items when needed with good quality reusables is when I moved to Lethbridge 4 years ago now. My mom gave me this giant pack of jumbo pack of reusable razors. And to this day, I still have reusable razors from that jumbo pack. And so because I haven't gotten rid of them yet, I haven't purchased a reusable replacement. But eventually, when I do run out of these disposable razors, I'm going to purchase a stainless steel razor. Another really awesome thing to think about with the zero waste journey is that you have options. You have tons of options. Take the time to evaluate what you can replace items with. And I had a little example set up. So picture that we are a couple of months ago, just at the beginning of this COVID-19 pandemic. There is no toilet paper in any stores anywhere, and you have just used your last roll. What do? What's your first thought? Well, what options do you have? Toilet paper is not an option, right?
My old sheets.
Awesome. I had purchased a giant box of paper wrapped toilet paper from I think it's some sustainable company. I can't remember now, but it was huge. It had like 60 rolls of toilet paper in it. And I just got to the end of that box. And so I took a moment and I went, I could buy more toilet paper, or I could buy an attachable bidet, which is what I ended up doing. And I love it. I was in Thailand a couple of years ago and all they have there is bidets. And it became my new favorite thing. So I knew I wanted one of them. All right. Another example of the options you have is when you're grocery shopping. Say you have the option between an unwrapped field cucumber or a plastic wrapped long English cucumber. Yeah, the field cucumber has thicker skin and maybe not quite as great a flavor, but if you're thinking along a zero waste mindset, it is the better option because that plastic wrap is not recyclable. If you've already begun adopting a waste-conscious mindset, I'm sure you've noticed that we often have to choose between a waste-conscious option and convenience. Some really great examples of how we can combat that are bringing reusables with us, like a reusable cup or camping dishes. I actually carry my Girl Guides camping dishes in my car everywhere I go. Eat in rather than getting takeout when you go to a restaurant, if that's simply not possible when we're not in the COVID-19 health safety times. A lot of restaurants in town will actually package your takeout in your own containers if you bring them. And I love that option. Another great way to reduce waste is to cook from scratch rather than buying packaged foods. And you can get most produce at most grocery stores totally waste-free and unwrapped. Repair broken items and ripped clothing if you have the capability and the tools. There's also a huge community of people who are willing to repair things for you. If you just reach out on Facebook, even on our zero waste community, there's lots of us that'll do some repairs, do a little sewing here and there. Make your own cloth handkerchiefs, rags, face masks, toilet paper, and even menstrual pads. Sometimes these things just aren't possible, and especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's adding an extra challenge for sure. But be gentle with yourself, be accepting of those situations because that's okay too. So now we'll talk about strategies to minimize food waste. So first I'd like to talk about reducing spoilage. So just preventing spoiled foods. You can do this by meal planning, which I absolutely love. I don't grocery shop without a meal plan at all anymore. I like to do this on pen and paper, but there are also numerous really good meal planning apps as well. Shop with a list based on your meal plan if you've made a meal plan. That way you're only getting what you need and you don't end up with that random bunch of carrots that sits in the fridge without a plan. Prioritize meals with more perishables. So if you know that you're going to be having a salad and a lasagna, say in one meal plan, put the salad first so you're using those perishables before you're using the pasta and the pasta sauce. That'll last longer. Have a leftovers day if you tend to accumulate leftovers. We do have a lot of leftovers in my household, and so often when they accumulate, we put them all on one shelf of the fridge, so they're all together, easy to find, and then we just go through and have a leftovers day when there's more than 2 or 3 containers there. If your fruit is starting to get overripe, some really good tricks for that are to make them into jams and jellies, or bake with them, make pies or pastries. If you'd rather not add sugar to them, you can also cut them up, freeze them on a baking sheet, and then put them in a container in the freezer to use later for smoothies or for baking down the road. If your veggies are getting overripe, just about any veggie can be made into a really nice pickle. I love pickling extra veggies, especially carrots, beans, asparagus. I even tried peas once and they turned out pretty good. You can also make salsas, soup, or again, cut them up, freeze them on a baking sheet, and put them in a container in the freezer for later. These are great for hash browns or stir fries. You can also save veggie scraps in the freezer to make veggie broth with later. Just be careful not to have too many stems or leaves in this, as this can make your broth bitter. But ends of carrots, the tops of tomatoes, the little parts where the stems attach on strawberries even end up making really good soup broth. Another great tip is carrot tops actually make incredible pesto. And then with bones from meat, you can use them again and make bone broth, and that's a really great option as well. And anything that does end up going bad, if you have the space and you have the capability, composting is a really great option to use to make use of those food scraps that are inedible. And the only thing I would mention with composting is just make sure you have a plan of how you're going to use it afterwards. It's awesome to have a big compost bin full of lovely, warm compost that's decomposing perfectly, but then what are you going to do with it? Where does it go? I have a couple of figures here that I'd like to share with you if I can. I'm just going to try and work the technology here. See if I can. Okay. Is that working?
We can see part of the screen.
Okay. Let me just see if I can move it over here. There we go. Does that work?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, I actually got these from Environment Lethbridge's food storage guide, which I've put the link on the bottom of here as well. And I can put that in the chat probably afterwards. So this is just a couple of storage tips to keep your food from going bad in storage and hopefully keep them a little bit longer. So a few that aren't mentioned on here, I like to keep greens if they have the base of the plant still attached to them in water just on the counter, and I found they do really well there, especially if they get a little bit of sunlight. Things like celery and green onions, I prop up in the fridge in some water on the bottom shelf just to be sure they don't freeze. If they don't have the base still attached and you just have the leaves, they keep really well wrapped in a damp towel in the bottom shelf of the fridge. Things like kale and spinach also do really well wrapped in a damp towel on the bottom shelf of the fridge. I also occasionally will throw my kale or my spinach directly into the freezer if they're starting to wilt in the fridge, especially if I'm going to use kale in something like coleslaw, because then I can just kind of crunch it all up and it comes out in little pieces. It's very convenient. And if I'm going to be cooking with spinach, especially, then I will freeze it as well if it's going limp in the fridge. Fresh herbs, again, like greens, if they still have the root attached, I will keep them in water on the counter. They do really well there. I even had one of my basil plants that we got from distributing greens that totally went nuts. It just grew, and I planted it in the garden, and it's still going. If they're cut and they don't have the base or the roots attached anymore, again, they can be wrapped in a damp towel in the fridge. And some herbs like rosemary, I actually like to freeze whole if I'm not using them all right away. They do pretty well in the freezer and they maintain their flavor really well. For other herbs like thyme or dill that don't freeze as well whole, you can put them in an ice cube tray with olive oil and then make little like herb cubes that work really well as well for making sauces. So I'll just unshare my screen. There we go. All right. And yeah, with food storage, experiment, see what works for your house, see what works in your fridge. Every place is going to be a little bit different. You have different air circulation, you have slightly different temperatures, you have different levels of sunlight. So experiment, see what works for you. Whatever methods work best and keep your food the longest are going to be your friends. So the next topic is shopping local. Shopping local can have a huge impact on your zero waste journey. There are a couple of reasons for this. Shopping local usually reduces transportation emissions, as well as the packaging due to transportation. And a lot of the time, if you're shopping from local suppliers, you may be able to make a personal relationship with the supplier, and quite a few local suppliers will provide their products totally package free if you've made an arrangement. This way you also know who you're supporting, and that's a really nice feeling. It builds community, and it makes the zero waste journey a lot easier if you have other people to reach out to gain resources from, to share information with. Very good resource. Again, you can usually get away with less packaging with local products, even if they are from a store, because they don't have to be shipped as far. They don't have to be protected from the weather. Your products are usually also more fresh because they don't have to travel to you. And this provides an added health bonus that your food is going to end up being more nutritious because it hasn't had to travel, it hasn't had to be stored for a long time. And in ancient wisdom like Ayurveda, it's actually said that food is easier to digest if it is from close to where you live rather than internationally. So that's just an added bonus. And the last topic I wanted to touch on is self-sustainability. So I love the quote, "Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime." It's a Chinese proverb. And so there are many ways to self-sustain in order to reduce the waste we produce. Again, remember that every individual is going to self-sustain differently, even if they live in the same household. I highly recommend taking this step in any direction or to any extent that excites you. So my first suggestion for self-sustainability is gardening. And I know a lot of people have taken advantage of that opportunity this spring, especially since we've all had the time. I myself have actually built a garden in my backyard this year, and I come from a long line of gardeners. So my grandparents have a half acre of garden, my mom has a large garden in her yard, and now I have a garden as well. And we sort of coordinate our plan. Like my grandparents are growing all of the green beans for the family this year, and I am growing all of the eggplants. And in that way, we just kind of trade and help each other out, and we use our space and our climates to our advantage because they are a little further north than I am. Another really great option is canning and preserving. So again, those jams, jellies, pickles. My grandma actually always makes pie filling and cans it as well. Salsa, anything like that. Really great option, also very good for community building. Another option for self-sustainability is to employ renewable energy sources. This can be a little bit more expensive to get into, but if it's where your passion lies, it's definitely doable. So there are options like solar panels, mini wind turbines, hydroelectricity. If you have running water on your property, you can use that, and electric cars, which I know that there was a little session on, I think, a couple of days ago. And so that's a really good resource as well. So is catching rainwater and storing it for use to water your garden, your flowers, and your lawn, if you have the space and if you have the capability. Strategies to use less energy to heat and cool the house are a really good way to be a little bit more self-sustainable as well. So use your windows, doors, blinds, and curtains to your advantage. If it's really warm outside and it's getting warm in your house, close the windows, close the doors, draw the curtains, keep the sunlight at bay a little bit to keep the house cooler. And again, for the opposite, open the windows, open the doors if you'd like it to be warmer in the house, and vice versa for the winter. And if you set your thermostat to a steady temperature, your house and your furnace and your air conditioning have to do less work to maintain that temperature in the house because there's less fluctuation. So this also helps to reduce energy use. And rather than reaching for the thermostat first, bundle up or dress down accordingly. Personally, I get so excited about learning to do things myself and gardening, growing my own food, and the potential of renewable energy. If you find passion in this area, there is definitely endless potential. So, in this presentation, we have talked about a waste-conscious mindset, evaluating your waste, replacing items when needed with high-quality reusables, and remember that you have options. Minimizing food waste, so start with a plan, food storage, and using all the bits. Shopping local reduces transportation emissions, you know who you're supporting, and there's less packaging. And self-sustainability, grow your own food, make your own preserves, and reduce energy and water consumption. Remember that this is your journey. Pursue whatever sparks passion. You make the rules. Be kind and gentle with yourself. Go forth and waste less your way. Is there any questions at all that I could answer?
Lori says, great information. Thank you.
Awesome.
I've put up a link for the Interfaith Food Bank, might have jamming, typically has jamming, canning, and pickling workshops locally. Hannah put up the wasteless.ca for information, as well as the Southern Alberta Zero Waste Group I threw up there as well, if there's anybody who's not a member of that already here. I sort of interrupted. Any questions for Loryne before we move on? We have a couple of minutes here.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny. Yeah, it's so funny. I had 18 minutes when I pre-recorded this presentation, and I got 55 minutes or 25 minutes in person. Hilarious.
When
Thank you, Fiona.
Yeah, that's you. The extra space. Thanks for capturing that. I always love the reminder, and when I'm teaching about, topics similar to this, the biggest take home for me is always that we are exactly where we need to be in our journey, and don't start with the hardest part. Start with what totally, like you said, brings you joy, and makes you feel good. It can feel daunting otherwise. So
Yeah, like 3 years ago I started with my kitchen, and this year I'm working on my bathroom. And that's the pace that works for me. And so there wasn't any expectation to get it all done all at once, and it's easier to just do it one step at a time anyways.
Yeah, totally. And we have a pretty large blooming zero waste group here in Lethbridge that's been getting traction more and more over the last probably 3 or 4 years. So if you are starting this journey, make sure you reach out through the Sustainable Living Association, through the Southern Alberta Zero Waste, and there's always folks there ready to share. And when we get back to like being in person again, we were having some work bees where we could make reusable tissues and paper towels and toilet papers, because it shouldn't cost you a bunch of money to do that. So cool. Thanks, Loryne.
Awesome. No problem. Thank you.
Well, if you are just joining us, this is going to be our last presentation for on Environment Week Sustainable Symposium. Scott is going to walk us through plants that heal your soil. Soul, excuse me. Is it soul or is it soil? It says it's soil. On my sheet, it says soul.
Okay.
Which I love, given my business is called Soulfully Soil. I really appreciate that. So yeah, we'll just wait a couple more minutes here, just because we're just before 2 o'clock. This might be a good bathroom break, especially for those of you who've been on here for the last 3 presentations. So we'll take just a 2-minute break here, and then I'll come back and introduce you, Scott, and then we'll jump into the next conversation.
Okay.
For those of you who are interested or joined us a little bit late, if you've missed one and or all of the presentations today and you want to get them, they are going to be posted up on the Environment Lethbridge website in the next couple of days. And so you can watch or rewatch the presentations as it calls to you. So we'll just take a little pause here and a bio break, and we'll be right back in about 90 seconds. All right. Well, we might as well dive in. Although I did promise people 2 minutes, so maybe I'll just start with the intro and we can work from there. Actually, Hannah, if you're still on the call, are we intending on having a question and answer at the end of Scott's presentation, or have we covered that in each of the classes?
I think we covered it. I didn't do like I didn't say that we would do it or advertise it, but definitely
Okay.
if anybody had questions, people can stay on for sure. Like the call will stay open until 3.
Okay.
Or the link will stay live until 3.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure. All right, well, we might as well dive in for the sake of being on time. I'm sure there's lots of folks who are joining us. My heating pack is no longer needed. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the symposium today. This is the last session in tonight's series. I'll make another invitation that if over the course of your time today on the symposium, if you've had some ideas or you know somebody or you are somebody who has information to share to this sustainable journey in whatever way that is, whatever topic that covers, feel free to reach out to Hannah at Environment Lethbridge or send me a message and let me know, because I suspect we'll be doing a few more of these sort of on a more consistent basis over time. We have a really incredible community starting to form around sustainable growing and regenerative agriculture and permaculture, and the zero waste movement is really catching on, and the fruit rescue program as well. So as that's happening, we know that there's tons of resources in the form of people's knowledge here in the community. So if you have some ideas and you want to see certain things, reach out and let us know. So we'll jump into plants that heal your soil. Scott Gillespie's joining us today. He's an independent agronomist with Plante's Dig Soil Construction, specializing in farmer, gardener, agronomist transition from conventional to a more regenerative agriculture. Scott has his BSc in agriculture with an agronomy focus from the University of Guelph and an MSc with a focus in plant science from the University of Manitoba. Along with a certified crop advisor status, he is also registered with the Alberta Institute of Agrologists as a PAG. I don't actually know what that is. I think my cousin has a similar education, and we're constantly talking about the benefits of soil. So I haven't actually met Scott, so welcome. We were going to meet at CD Saturday. Scott was going to do a presentation then, and I think that's sort of how this has come about, is like, let's invite everybody back so we can be in the same place again and share the info. So thanks for being here, Scott. I will let you take it away.
Okay. A PAG is a professional agrologist. And so anybody that works with, even in, a lot of them are in soil reclamation, like in the oil field. And so you need a agrology designation for that. And then also if you're working in agriculture. So what I'm going to do is I have a podcast. And so I actually made my presentation into a podcast and put that out there. So I'm going to kind of go through the audio part of it, and then because we have the ability to do visual, I've got some pictures at the end. So I'm going to start out with that. So when you think of soil amendments for your garden, you usually think of bringing something in from the outside. And there's two basic types. There's biological amendments, which bring in organic matter, and that could be like animal manure. And then there's also the ones that change the chemical structure of the soil. And so that'd be something like lime or pH, or lime that would raise the pH. But then, so these shouldn't be confused with organic and conventional agriculture. Those are different terms. So organic is a system that doesn't use synthetic inputs, but it still can use chemical inputs as long as they're natural. So BT is a chemical that is created by bacteria that's permitted in most systems. Likewise, conventional agriculture can use organic amendments. So they can be confusing terms. But what they do is they work together to change the physical nature of the soil, and it helps the plants to root better, and it helps the microbes to function better in the soil. So as gardeners, we're accustomed to picking up these amendments from local garden centers and adding them to our soil. And especially with this past year, or what's happened in the past few months, you forget about the long supply chains that it takes to get a lot of these amendments to us. So we can't take it for granted that we can just always pick these up. And so some of these, if they're not local, they might have traveled thousands of kilometers to get to where we are. So even just the fuel alone in that is a large source of carbon, a carbon footprint. But I just want you to think through, this is an example that I've come up with, is if you think of a bag of sheep manure, if you buy it from a garden center, you have to think of where it comes from. And so it doesn't come from a farm where sheep are grazing out in pasture. You can't collect manure from there. So it has to come from a farm where sheep are in a barn. And then if you think of where did the feed come from, it had to come somewhere growing on a field. The field could have been nearby, or it could have been from thousands of kilometers away. And then so if you think through the field, what was exported from it, which is the food for the animals, doesn't go back to where it came from. So the nutrients do need to be replaced. So where do those nutrients come from? And where I got this example from, or this idea from, is there's a person called Andy McGuire, and he's it's the Center for, let's see here, Center for Sustaining Agriculture and Natural Resources out of Washington State University. And he puts up a lot of really interesting articles thinking through these things. And so probably I can put up a link to one of his articles that's really fascinating. So it just gets through thinking like how nutrients flow and how things flow through the whole system. So importing nutrients or amendments isn't bad as long as you understand how the footprint that they have. So in my own garden, I use compost, and I make that by collecting leaves and combining them with vegetable scraps from my own garden, and also vegetable scraps from the kitchen from over the years, or from over the entire year. From my trees, I use wood chips that I get from the town. So I'm actually in Tabor, so I can get the wood chips. We can pick them up for free. So, but these wood chips again are stuff that have come, they've moved. It's not as long of a distance, but they've traveled. They've come from residents as they trim or cut down trees, and then employees of the town as they maintain parks. So it's still coming from an external source. And what if you think it through another way, is that what if I didn't have this? So what if we didn't have wood chips available, or even the leaves that I use for my compost? If people didn't put them out, like I just rely on people raking leaves and putting them in bags for the town to pick up, and I just try to catch them before the town gets them. And if everybody valued their waste like what in the same way I do, then I wouldn't have that. So that's where I've been looking at plants and learning more about how plants can function in a garden or in a system. So where they fit in the best or the easiest is in the shoulder seasons, which is that anywhere from fall through winter and into spring. And if we look at cold tolerant plants that we can grow when the vegetables can't grow, that's when the ideal time is to make these plants that can work on the soil kind of in the off season and be doing things for us. So I'm going to touch on 3 different types of crops, and I was able to get all of these crops, or all these cover crops, locally last year. I got them from Greenhaven, and they're actually West Coast Seeds packages. So, and I checked West Coast Seeds just recently, and they still have everything available. So if you're looking for them, that's where you can get them. I also, because I do agronomy consulting and work with farmers, I can get, when we do cover crops on field scales, there's thousands of pounds of seed, so I can just grab a little bit every once in a while, and I get a good supply of it. So so the first one is the fall rye, and Mandy did talk about this earlier. It's in the United States, it's commonly called cereal rye, and for me, it's a really amazing plant to have in our environment here. one year I planted it in mid-October and it still grew. There was snow, and then in November, everything melted and warmed up a bit and it started greening up. And then I saw it a little bit through the winter. And then when the snow was melting in the spring, it was green and growing into the snow. So it's one that really can do a lot. And if it's planted earlier, it does even more. It can hold the soil in place. It can keep weeds away. It has its own, it produces its own herbicide in a sense, because it makes something that inhibits weeds or any other plants from growing around it. So this can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. You have to just be careful when you're putting your own plants in that you want. The biggest advice seems to be that if you can, as long as it's killed in advance, 1 or 2 weeks ahead of time. And I found if I just lightly work up the surface where I'm planting my vegetables, then it doesn't seem to be a problem. And when I'm talking light, like just 1 or 2 inches, or if not even that, actually just kind of disturb the soil a bit and it seems to be fine. But it is still something to watch out for. The second one is hairy vetch, and that was also mentioned earlier. It's a legume, so it's a great one for fixing nitrogen. And because we have such a cold season, we just don't have a lot of time for getting legumes in, but it is a really amazing one. I'll show you more pictures. I'll show you in the pictures just what it was able to survive. But it can, it's a cold season legume, so it lasts all winter, or it can last all winter, and it grows very well, and it can produce some nitrogen for you. Now, the last one that I find a very, very interesting plant is to have some type of a mustard or brassicas in your system. And these ones don't last through the winter, but they can have some disease suppressing capabilities. They're not something that if you have a poor soil or it's in bad shape that you're going to get rid of disease on. It's more of a long-term play that it helps to suppress some of the disease-causing organisms. And in potato systems, they found if they can grow it as a green manure and actually turn it into the soil, it can do a lot of good. But that's something you would only do if you really needed to restore some soil that had been poorly taken care of over a long time. So I think what I'm gonna do, I'll try the screen sharing. Okay. So are you able to see? You able to see it? Okay. So this is where I love gardening, and I'm also work with farmers. So I work, like a lot of ideas flow back and forth for what I see working in agriculture and then what I see working in the garden. So this here is a picture of a cornfield. This is actually from near Bassano, which is, if you don't know where that is, it's between Brooks and Calgary. So they have planted, or they have established a cover crop within their existing cash crop, which is the corn. And so the idea is that then as soon as this, well, so it's already growing, it's already catching those little bits of sunlight that's coming through, but then as the corn starts to mature, and then as they harvest it, then it's already ready to go. It's already growing. And this here is a farmer-made machine to do this. They when the corn was only, or once the corn was large enough, or that they did all their weed control on it, then they can run this through this this machine blows seed through these tubes, and then there's just a small little cultivator shank that just disturbs the soil a bit, and a chain that goes afterwards, and it plants a seed. So here's my garden, and the cats are not my own. They're the neighbor cats, but they're very friendly ones, and they seem to catch mice, and they don't seem to do too much damage in the garden. So as long as they're doing their jobs, then they're okay in there. So I got thinking on my own garden what I could do. The pipes are PVC pipe that I made my own drip system with. And so I plant up against the pipes, and then there's the space in between. So you should be able to see it. There's just little tiny plants that are coming up in between the rows. So that's what I kind of took that idea from what they were doing. So I established them between the rows. And then, so this is an example. The cover crop now you can see is growing, and this is where I had harvested the garlic. And so the cover crop is just ready to go as soon as anything is harvested. And otherwise, if something's large, then it's kind of suppressing it. So this picture here, I was really happy in September. So this is where you never quite know what's going to grow. So the rye, I planted the rye and the mustards, and there were some clovers in there too, but the hairy vetch is what really just took off. And so this is what it looked like in September. So what I did is on the left picture there, you can see what that is. It's called a Dutch auger, and what we use it for in my business is we can go up to 4 feet down in the soil looking for soil moisture and help with irrigation scheduling. But I used it as a garlic planter, so I could just make a little hole and drop the garlic in and that. And then on the right is what I did. I just covered over, just kind of pushed the plants back into place and just left it. And then this happened in September. So you can see like the garden is behind the tree there. And unfortunately, not long after this picture was taken, then that big branch on the plum tree there actually did break off. So I'm going to see what we can get out of this plum tree this coming year. But anyways, so this is what the garden looked like about a week or so later. And if you remember, like after that snow, like it didn't melt extremely fast, but then we did get a Chinook. And then I think this is mid-October, or no, I think this was in mid-October. And there was a fairly, like you can see everything's still green and the frost is on it, but it was still growing. And you can see in the background, it's my composting system. I was in the process of turning things. So there's a kind of a double bin on the right is where I put all my leaves, and in the center is where I put my veggie scraps and leaves weekly throughout the year. And it's just basically a 3-bin system, where on the left would have been empty from using it, and I'm just turning them over. So it takes a couple years, but then I get this compost. I just wanted to put it in there because I think it's the best compost around is my own. So I get that after about a couple years. So this is the garden. This was in January. And if you remember, we had that week or so of -25 highs and -35 lows. And there must have been enough snow cover over it, because as things melted, because then if you remember, we had that extreme cold, and then it just turned warm. And so this is that vetch again, still going. And actually these pictures are only a day apart. So this was when the Chinook really came in and took everything out, and it was still green. So, I mean, the ground is pretty well frozen, so there's not a whole lot going on, but it's still sitting there doing its job. In March, we had some pretty cold weather, I think -15, -20, and that killed most of it. But even then, this hairy vetch was hanging on. So I'm really impressed with it, and I'm really hoping to get it going again this coming year. And this is some fall rye that I had in a different part of my yard. And again, it's just amazing. It's green underneath the snow. So, and this is the last picture. So this is the spring. I put the yellow circles in there so you kind of have a reference point. That's like the stake of where I'm planting things. So then I just, so the left picture is what it looks like undisturbed, and then I moved the mulch aside and I planted my lettuce, and then these metal shelves were something that the previous owners of our house left us, and I don't know why they had them or where they got them, but they work great to cover over new plantings of little seeds so that they to keep them moist and keep the cats out and keep the birds out, and also the wind, because I found even compost can get blown out. So so that's kind of how I've been making things work, or my past year, and I'm always experimenting and trying new things. So, and then that's what the garden I hope will look like in a few weeks. So I think that's it for the presentation right now. So I'm trying to figure out how to get the screen sharing off. Oh,
There should be a pause.
Yep, I found it. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Is there any questions for Scott, you guys? There was a question earlier. Oh, go ahead.
And you put in the chat too about that you have the fall rye.
I do. I have a couple of bags of cover crops that I had for a larger property that I no longer have. And so they're literally taking up space in my closet. So if you need, I have oats and I have fall rye. So if you are interested in even just trying some, I'm happy to put them in an envelope out on my deck here in Lethbridge, and or drop them off at my leisure, or leave them out at your leisure to pick up. So if you want to do that, you can just send me. I put my email address in the thread here. Get a hold of me. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you have a couple acres, I don't have that much, but I have a bag that's 10 kilograms. So.
Could I just clarify how you use the fall rye? Like, do you plant it in the areas where you've harvested the vegetables to then create that cover just over the winter, and then you kind of pull it away and use that to where you want to plant the next year? Is that how it works?
Yeah. Well, I'm still experimenting with it. Like the fall rye. Well, I tried. Like I had it in a mixture that I planted in June between the rows, and I don't think it did as well. I think it was a little too early for it. It'd be more typically planted in late August or in mid-September, sometimes even up till October. Where it can be a really big advantage is after really late harvested crops like potatoes or carrots or anything like that, where if you want to try to get something growing quickly or just get something growing, it will grow really late. So
okay, thank you.
Just one caution though too is you do really have to watch it in the spring, because if you don't get it killed early, it makes a massive root system and is very hard to kill. So you have to be on top of it early.
Good to know.
Yeah.
I will add to that in the sense that I've used the technique before in annual garden beds, and you can mow them down to just kind of keep exhausting that 2 or 3 times. And then the root structure doesn't really have time to like really establish and do much.
Yep.
And the vetch in an annual garden setting, I like the way you're using it from the end of the season to the next season, but it also can be a bit of a nightmare. So the other thing I think to note about the nitrogen fixing quality too is if you trim it or if you cut it, it drops those nodules, which continue to help your soil. So that's one of the strategies that I will use, is intentionally cutting that, or the clover, cutting them back. So I've included. Go ahead.
So that could be where, like, so say if I would have had a more of an open fall, I could have cut that back a little earlier and let it kind of did something with it, rather than having the snow just smash it down. So,
that's the beauty of Southern Alberta. You're never sure when that's happening. I put a link in the side notes here too for West Coast Seeds cover crops. One of the things that West Coast Seeds has is an actual cover crop. When you get their manual or whatever, their seed catalog, they actually, and they have it online, they have a document, a 1-page document that lists all the cover crops that you spoke of and a whole bunch more. And it tells you when in the season to plant it for best benefit. And so some of these, it'll say, you know, not till September. Some of them will say you can use it in the spring, but not again till the late fall, or you can plant it in July. So all of those specific questions can be found on that page. Cool. That's great. I love seeing pictures of vetch. The other benefit of the vetch is it has a beautiful, big, tall purple flower, which our pollinators love. So had that snowstorm not happened, it would have given them some benefit that way.
Yeah, that was one thing. I think they were just getting close to that, or there's a few of them, and then, yeah,
that's super cool. Any other questions for Scott, you guys? I think one of the questions was like, somebody had asked to name the 3 cover crops. So I put the fall rye, hairy vetch, and you had referred to one of the mustard seed family / brassicas. I don't think you said specifically which one it was you planted.
Yeah, actually there is, it's in the list of their cover crops. It's white mustard.
Oh, okay. Like an
It's
Allison,
in the West Coast Seeds.
or Alyssum, or whatever they call it. Okay. Yeah, so that link
Yeah,
I shared will have it.
Yeah. I was really happy last year when I went into Greenhaven and actually found cover crop seeds available. So, because normally I've just been taking them from farms and that. So.
I would recommend to everybody who's starting to play with cover crops, living mulches, any of that. So whether it's in the context of like companion planting and food forestry, annual food gardens, perennial systems, whatever application, order your seeds, especially seeing what we saw in the spring right now with everybody jumping on board with growing. Order a stock of cover crop and have it on hand, and or connect with this community, because I always buy large bags because I know if they're out, they're out. So just be mindful of that going into the winter time. And buckwheat is another one you can use, and you can get it anywhere in any of our growing stores typically. So
that's one I need to try. So yeah,
it's easy. It's so good for your annual gardens. It's so much easier than the root systems that some of these other plants do. So.
Okay.
Anyways, that's so cool. You were speaking my language. I appreciate your time. Thanks. All right, we've got some thank yous and some thank you so muches. Any other questions, you guys, before we wrap it up? Sweet. Can you throw up a link, Scott, where folks can find you if they have any questions or they want further information?
Yep, I will do that.
So I'll just repeat again. I have a whole whack load of rye. If you want to try it, get a hold of me. It will make me feel better to have it in the ground than in my closet. Thanks, Hannah.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to Mandy and Loryne and Scott and Jennifer, if you're still on the call, for your time this afternoon for celebrating Environment Week. And thanks everyone for joining in. Tomorrow's our last session. We're going to do a talk on solar panels if you have any interest. I can't remember the speaker. Annette Kerpel is as an employee with us at Environment Lethbridge, and her mom is a master in her field of solar panels. So she'll be joining us for a talk tomorrow, also on Zoom, if you want to join that call as well.
I threw the link up there too for that event. That's a lie. I did somewhere. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.